Drew Katrina Sheridan was born September 26, 1981 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She was the younger of two children to her parents, Alan and Linda. When Drew was 3 years old, her parents divorced but kept their friendship. From age 10, she and her brother Sven were raised by Linda and her second husband Sid Walker, a travel agent in a comfortable home on Whitefish Lake, renowned as one of Minnesota's most scenic vacation spots. Drew blossomed in high school, becoming an honor student, joining the golf team, and getting elected homecoming queen in 1999. But her real passion was for art. Her room at home was filled with her sketches of rock stars, models, and her friends. After graduating from high school, she went to the University of North Dakota Grand Forks, a city of about 50,000 people. Friends described Drew as a person in love with life and ready to lend a helping hand to everyone. She often traveled around the country, but her dream was to visit Australia, and Drew was going to go there in February. In preparation for the event to save up more money, Drew worked 2 jobs in her spare time: a sales associate at Victoria's Secret and a waitress at a nightclub in Grand Forks. On Saturday, November 22, 2003, Drew's shift at the Victoria's Secret store located in Columbia Mall ended at 4 p.m. Later that day, she was supposed to work at a nightclub. Before leaving the mall, Drew decided to go shopping and bought a purse from a certain store. She called her boyfriend, Chris Lane, as she made her way to her car in the parking lot. Suddenly, after Drew said, Okay, the call was disconnected, but Chris didn't give it much thought. There was nothing important they were discussing, and so he didn't call back. About 3 hours later, Chris's phone rang again, and it was Drew calling. When he answered it, all he heard was a noise like the sound of the wind and the sound of buttons being pressed on the phone. 3 weeks later, in an interview on a television station, Chris recounted the thoughts that flashed through his mind when his conversation with Drew was interrupted. I did not know the sense of urgency of this phone call at the time, he said. I never in a million years dreamt that this was happening. There was no sense of urgency, more just a cell phone call being cut off for any number of reasons. Honestly, I had no idea that this terrible thing was happening. Drew was living in a college dorm where she shared a room with a friend named Meg Murphy. About the same time Chris received a strange phone call, Meg received a call from the nightclub where they were trying to find out why Drew hadn't come to work and wasn't answering the phone. She was a responsible employee and always came to work early, so her absence immediately caused everyone's concern. However, Meg didn't know where Drew might be and was surprised that she hadn't shown up for work. Trying to find out where her friend Meg had disappeared, she first called mutual acquaintances and then called the local hospital where she was told that Drew had not been admitted there. Around 9 p.m., unable to find out anything, Meg called the police. Knowing that Drew worked at Columbia Mall, a police officer was dispatched there. At this point, the mall was already closed. Driving around the parking lot, the officer saw Drew's car. Upon examining it, he found that the car was unlocked. There were no signs of a struggle or any other crime. A black nylon sheath from a folding knife was found on the ground near the car. It wasn't clear yet whether it had anything to do with Drew's disappearance, but such a find was not encouraging. On the seat in the car were papers, a wallet, and a new purse purchased that day, suggesting that even if Drew had faced some dirty deed, it certainly hadn't been a robbery. Neither friends, boyfriend, nor parents knew where Drew might be, so investigators began to lean toward the theory that they were dealing with a kidnapping. First of all, detectives checked out Chris Lang. He was almost immediately ruled out as a suspect because he was in Minnesota, 300 miles from Grand Forks. From Chris, the police learned about the 2 phone calls Drew had made, that one had been abruptly interrupted, and that during the second, made a few hours later, wind noises and the sound of button pressing could be heard. The next day, when the mall where Drew worked opened, the detectives arrived there to review the security camera footage. As it turned out, there were no security cameras in the parking lot where the missing girl's car was parked. But fortunately, there were quite a few security cameras inside the mall. Going through the footage, detectives found a moment when Drew went into one of the local stores after work, where she bought herself a purse. She was calm and in no hurry to go anywhere. She was wearing a pink sweater and was holding a jacket. At 4:55 p.m., Drew paid for her purchase at the register, then put on her jacket and left the store. On her way out, she called Chris. The call was made at exactly 5 p.m., and as we now know, at 5:04 p.m., the conversation between Drew and Chris was abruptly interrupted after she said, Okay. Knowing that the call was interrupted after 4 minutes, one of the detectives decided to conduct an experiment. Setting the timer for 4 minutes, He began walking slowly from the store where Drew had bought her purse to the parking lot where her car was parked. When the alarm sounded indicating that 4 minutes had passed, that was in the parking lot near where the car had been found. This indicated that something had happened while Drew was at her car. However, as mentioned earlier, there were no cameras overlooking the parking lot, and that made it difficult to investigate. Drew's disappearance attracted media attention, and as a result, a huge number of people learned about what had happened to her, many of whom decided not to remain indifferent to someone else's misfortune. In addition to police officers, over 1,000 volunteers participated in the search for Drew. FBI officers also joined the investigation. The last call that was made from Drew's phone was traced to the small town of Fisher in neighboring Minnesota, which is only a 30-minute drive from the mall where she worked. As you can see on the map, the area around these two towns is occupied by fields. Police used helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, horses, and dogs to explore these fields. The landowners were asked to check their properties themselves, but unfortunately, this was inconclusive. And at first, no leads could be found. The search radius increased with each new day, and 4 days later, an ominous discovery was made. A boot was found under a bridge in the town of Crookston. A roommate noted that on the day of her disappearance, Drew had left the house wearing those boots. Later, the fact that the shoe belonged to the missing girl was confirmed by forensics. Crookston is a small town of less than 10,000 people. It is located about 30 miles from Grand Forks, where Drew disappeared from. Further searches in the Crookston area yielded no results, as there was nothing of investigative interest to be found. A reward of $20,000 was initially offered for information that would help to determine Drew's whereabouts, and then the reward was increased to $140,000. At this point, the only clue that could lead to Drew was the surveillance footage at Columbia Mall. The detectives again sat down to watch hundreds of hours of footage from various cameras. But this time, they decided to focus their attention not on Drew. They speculated that whoever abducted her may have been following her and may also have been on the videos. The investigators spent hours at the monitors before they saw the person who had caught their attention. They noticed a man walking aimlessly around the mall. He was not buying anything and seemed to be looking more at the people around him than at the merchandise being sold. At 3:41 p.m., he sat down on a bench near the mall exit and continued to watch people casually walk past him. After about 10 minutes, he got up from the bench and, wearing black gloves on his hands, walked out into the lobby where there was a camera hanging overhead, into which he looked. This shot was taken 72 minutes before Drew's conversation with her boyfriend was interrupted, and she disappeared. After watching the man get up from his seat and walk away, investigators noticed that he only did so when a blonde woman walked past him carrying a grocery cart heading in the direction of the parking lot. Detectives did not consider this a coincidence. Rather, in their opinion, the man seemed to have chosen a suitable victim and followed her. The identity of this woman was unknown, but police were aware that only one person, Drew Shoden, had disappeared from the mall parking lot that day. Given the slight resemblance between Drew and the woman the suspicious man was following, it has been suggested that he had a particular image of the victim. If the kidnapper really was this man, and if for some reason he had failed to kidnap this woman, his next target might have been Drew. She had left the mall around 5 p.m., a time when it was already dark, which might have played into the hands of the perpetrator. At this point in the investigation, there were 3 cities in the case: Grand Forks, where Drew was kidnapped; Fisher, where her phone was last active; and Crookston, where the shoe was found. With this data in mind, the FBI began checking the files of all registered sex offenders from these cities and their environs. Comparing the photos from the files with the image of the suspicious man from the mall, there was only one man who matched all the parameters, and that was Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., who had an extensive criminal history of repeated crimes against women. The 50-year-old man had spent the last 23 years behind bars. Rodriguez was the second oldest of 5 children born in Laredo, Texas in February 1953 to migrant workers Dolores and Alfonso Rodriguez Sr. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. claimed to have had an unhappy childhood, describing his home life as unpleasant because his parents were highly critical of him and unreasonable in their demands. His family moved from state to state for 15 years until they finally settled in Crookston in 1963. Rodriguez became increasingly isolated while growing up, which was further compounded by language barriers. His preferred language was Spanish, and he struggled with English, which made school especially challenging. He eventually dropped out of school during the 9th grade and began working as a laborer at the American Crystal Sugar Company plant in Crookston. Rodriguez claimed that he was molested by older women during his youth, which he said was the source of his hostile feelings against women. In October 1974, at the age of 21, He asked a woman for a ride home, but instead directed her to the driveway in Crookston, where he grabbed her by the throat and tried to force her to please him. The next month, he approached another woman who was sitting in a truck outside of a Crookston movie theater. He threatened her with a knife and ordered her to a secluded spot in the countryside where he forced her to have intercourse with him. Then in 1979, he tried to kidnap a 69-year-old high school English teacher while she was out walking one night in Crookston. The woman fought back as Rodriguez tried to force her into his car. In a fit of anger, he stabbed her with a knife in her elbow and abdomen. Yet she managed to break free and run to safety. The woman, who was artistically talented, was able to draw a composite sketch of Rodriguez that closely resembled him and led to his capture. He was convicted of attempted kidnapping and aggravated assault and sent to prison for 23 years until his release in May 2003. He had been released from prison 6 months before Drew disappeared and was registered as a sex offender of the highest third degree, which meant that his risk of reoffending was as high as possible. Before his release from prison, Rodriguez's family voiced their concerns to Minnesota Department of Corrections officials. Even his family feared that he was going back to his old ways. But despite their fears, Alfonso was released because he had served his entire sentence. After his release, Rodriguez lived with his mother in Crookston, just a couple of miles from the bridge where, it should be recalled, Drew's shoe had been found, which was another factor not in his favor. The detectives decided to talk to Alfonso Rodriguez, and of course, he denied any involvement in Drew's disappearance. The man confirmed that he had been at the Columbia Mall the day she disappeared, saying that he had gone to the movie theater and watched the movie Once Upon a Time in Mexico. What he didn't consider was that none of the movie theaters in Grand Forks were showing the movie that day. Police searched Rodriguez's car and realized with regret that Drew was probably no longer alive. It looks at this time like there's no chance we're going to find Drew alive, Grand Forks County Sheriff Dan Hill told reporters. I believe that it is more of a recovery than a rescue mission at this point in time. In Rodriguez's car, dark red dried stains were found in several places in the interior, which forensics later determined were drops of Drew's blood. The affidavit says blood was found on the passenger side rear window and in the back seat, as well as 2 other areas in the passenger compartment. The blood did come back. It was a DNA match with Drew from the DNA taken from Drew's toothbrush, the sheriff said. A folding knife was found in the trunk, which matched the sheath found in the parking lot next to Drew's car. A receipt was also found indicating that Rodriguez had purchased this knife complete with its sheath from a hardware store located several hundred yards from the parking lot where Drew disappeared. Although Drew was not found alive or dead, investigators gathered enough evidence to charge Rodriguez. 8 days after she disappeared on December 1, 2003, the man was arrested. Rodriguez, who was imprisoned in a Grand Forks jail, claimed that he was not involved in Drew's disappearance and refused to speak to law enforcement officials or provide information as to her whereabouts despite the evidence against him. During a brief bond hearing several days earlier, bail for Rodriguez's release was set at a staggering $5 million. While he remained silent in custody, the search for Drew continued unabated and focused around these 3 towns. The work of the searchers was made more difficult by the snow that covered the area abundantly. In an unprecedented move, the governors of North Dakota and Minnesota pledged during a December 9th press conference to aid in the search for Drew by employing several hundred members of the National Guard and other state employees. North Dakota Governor John Hovland said that Drew's disappearance was something that has touched every North Dakotan. Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty told reporters that he was very proud of the cooperation and the collaboration that's been exhibited by members of the community and police officials. Despite all the efforts made, there were no results. And due to worsening weather conditions, the authorities decided to suspend the search operation. In spring, the intensive search continued. Those searching for Drew hoped they would be able to find her as the winter snow had just begun to melt. After 5 long months of searching, they were eager to return Drew home. Finally, on April 17, 2004, Drew's body was found. It lay in a field in Crookston, just a few miles from the bridge under which the boot had been found. Drew's family was overwhelmed with grief upon hearing of the heart-wrenching discovery. Her father told reporters, "We were waiting for that call, and when that call came, we all stopped living for a second. It was her parents' worst nightmare and one that would haunt them for the rest of their lives." The field where the body was found had already been searched, but apparently because of the large drifts, they could not find it immediately. Drew was naked below the waist, which made the motive of the crime obvious. Her hands were tied behind her back, and there was a rope around her neck and a cut. Under the rope were the remnants of a plastic bag indicating that the bag had first been put over Drew's head and then tied around her neck with a rope. Hair matching Rodriguez's DNA was found on Drew's jacket. Before she died, the young woman had been brutally beaten and stabbed repeatedly. The medical examiner listed 3 possible causes of her death. It was either the cut on her neck, suffocation, or the third possible cause, which was hypothermia. On April 24, 2004, after many months without a word, Drew's family was able to say goodbye to her. About 1,500 people attended the mourning ceremony. North Dakota, where Drew was kidnapped, abolished the death penalty back in 1975. Minnesota, where the body was found, did not use the death penalty as a punishment either. However, because Drew had been transported across state lines, the crime was considered a federal crime, and therefore the prosecutor's office had the right to seek the death penalty for Rodriguez. On August 30, 2006, Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. was convicted in the Drew Shirodin case. The jury recommended that he be sentenced to death. On February 8, 2007, Judge Ralph Erickson, during the hearing, told the unconfessing Rodriguez that his senseless and violent actions caused the jury and the court to make a difficult decision. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. became the first person sentenced to death in the state of North Dakota in nearly a century. After 6 years on death row, on June 28, 2013, Rodriguez confessed that he was the one who kidnapped and took Drew's life. However, the story doesn't end there. Ralph Erickson, who had previously been the district judge who sentenced Rodriguez to death, became a U.S. Court of Appeals judge, and it was he who in 2021 overturned his own conviction of Rodriguez and ordered a new sentencing phase. Rodriguez's guilt is not in doubt and has been confirmed by various types of DNA testing. In this case, it is the death penalty that is at issue. Erickson overturned the death sentence, citing among other things, the failure of defense attorneys to properly examine Rodriguez's mental health and the testimony of forensic expert Michael McGee, which the judge himself said misled him. This is the expert's testimony, which stated at the time that Rodriguez violated Drew's sexual integrity within 24 to 36 hours of the abduction. The fact is that there was no direct evidence to support this, such as Rodriguez's seminal fluid on Drew's body. According to the judge, the expert gave his opinion, but it was not supported by the facts, which misled the judge and influenced his verdict. Still, in reversing the death sentence, Erickson noted that even without the presence of Rodriguez's seminal fluid, the circumstances in which Drew's body was found, naked below the waist with her hands tied behind her back, were indicative of a sexually motivated crime. Judge Erickson said that the failure to examine Rodriguez's mental health, both generally and at the time of his crime, was a violation of his constitutional rights. After Rodriguez's death sentence was overturned, the federal prosecutor's office issued a statement saying they would seek the death penalty for him again. However, 2 years later, in 2023, the prosecutors abandoned those plans and accepted that Alfonso Rodriguez's death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. A statement to that effect was issued, which said, "The United States of America by Max Schneider, United States Attorney for the District of North Dakota, hereby withdraws the notice of intent to seek a sentence of death against defendant Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., filed on October 28, 2004, Schneider wrote in a March 14 court filing, "The United States no longer intends to seek the death penalty in this case. My thoughts today are with Drew Shirodin's family, particularly her parents, Linda Walker and Alan Shirodin," said Schneider. "They are genuinely good people and loving parents who in the wake of an unimaginable loss have worked closely with our office for nearly 20 years. We continue to wish them the greatest measure of peace possible. I also want to commend the trial team, including former United States Attorney Drew Wrigley, as well as our office's appellate attorneys and support staff. Over the last 2 decades, they have continuously upheld the high standards of the Department of Justice through their work on this tragic case. As a result of their efforts, Mr. Rodriguez is and will remain a convicted murderer. The directive to withdraw the death notice has changed how the United States Attorney's Office will proceed with this case. What will not change is that Mr. Rodriguez will draw his last breath in a federal prison." This case led to changes in sex offender registration laws. On July 27, 2006, President George Bush signed the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act, which included Drew's Law. Drew's Law changed the name of the National Sex Offender Public Registry to the Drew Shirodin National Sex Offender Public Website, which provides information to the public on the whereabouts of registered sex offenders, regardless of state, territory, or tribal boundaries. On June 22, 2013, news broke that Alfonso Rodriguez had been transferred from death row prison in Terre Haute, Indiana to Coleman II, a high-security penitentiary in Sumterville, Florida. This is where it looks like he will spend his last days. The case of Adrienne Robert. Adrienne Robert was born on January 4, 1983, in Brunswick, Maine. She graduated from Leavitt High School in Maine in February 2001 and the University of Maine at Augusta in February 2005. 2 years later, in February 2007, she relocated from Maine to Clearwater, Florida. Those who knew her described Adrienne as a beautiful, kind person, always happy and vibrant. At the time of her disappearance, Adrienne was in a relationship with her boyfriend, Justin, and they were planning to start a life together. She was renting a house with her friend Jay. As their relationship progressed, Adrienne and Justin found a new house in July 2012, where they intended to move in together. On the evening of July 13, 2012, Adrienne decided Justin couldn't join them because he was busy with some other things. He didn't object to Adrienne spending the evening with Jay as they were close friends. Initially, Adrienne and Jay celebrated at home, reminiscing about good times and having a few drinks. Later, they decided to continue the night out and went to the Diamond Doll strip club. Jay called 911 at 3:34 a.m. to report that he had found his roommate, Adrienne, unresponsive. He told the operator that they had been at a nightclub earlier, but Adrienne had left before him. When Jay arrived home, he discovered Adrienne on the bathroom floor, her eyes open but not breathing. There were also signs of a struggle, suggesting a crime had taken place. The 911 operator instructed Jay to focus and perform CPR on Adrienne, guiding him through the process. Jay followed the instructions, attempting to revive Adrienne until the paramedics arrived. Unfortunately, by the time the ambulance arrived, Adrienne was deceased, and the medics were unable to help her. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The police investigation aimed to answer two key questions. Who was responsible for Adrienne's death, and was her roommate involved? The police began by thoroughly searching the house, checking every closet and under every bed to ensure the perpetrator was not hiding inside. Detectives and forensic experts observed that there were no signs of forced entry on the front door when they first arrived at the crime scene. Adrienne's body was found on the bathroom floor, wearing only a bra. A stab wound to the chest was the cause of death. The signs of a struggle in the bathroom suggested that Adrienne had tried to defend herself, leading detectives to suspect that the killer was a man. The detectives had to wait for the autopsy results to get more information. While searching Adrienne's bedroom, they noticed that someone had cut off a piece of her bed sheet. It seemed like the killer was trying to destroy evidence, possibly to eliminate any DNA they may have left behind. However, it was puzzling that the killer didn't take the entire sheet, as the remaining part could still contain DNA. Further investigation revealed a substance similar to seminal fluid on the sheet, which was sent to the lab for analysis. Additionally, Adrienne's car was missing from the parking lot next to her house, suggesting that the killer may have stolen it. The police launched an investigation into the crime, searching for potential witnesses and issuing an alert for the victim's car. To piece together the events surrounding Adrienne's death, detectives needed to gather as much information as possible about her final hours. Before proceeding, however, they had to break the devastating news to her family. Adrienne's parents were stunned by the revelation, struggling to come to terms with the loss of their beloved daughter. Justin discovered the shocking truth the morning after, when he saw police surrounding her house. He immediately sensed something was terribly wrong. The detectives then broke the devastating news. Adrienne had been killed the previous night. Given that perpetrators often return to the crime scene, and Justin's close relationship with Adrienne, the detectives felt compelled to investigate him as a potential suspect. In cases like this, it's standard procedure to investigate the people closest to the victim first. Later that day, police found Adrienne's car abandoned just a few blocks away from her house, with the headlights still on and the keys in the ignition. This discovery further supported the investigators' initial theory that the killer had likely used Adrienne's car to escape the crime scene. Forensic experts thoroughly searched the interior of Adrienne's car for any clues that could help crack the case. Meanwhile, investigators reviewed the CCTV footage to identify the person who was driving the car. Although there were no cameras at the exact location where the police found the car, neighboring buildings had cameras that captured footage of the area. After examining the recordings, investigators spotted a man wearing shorts, a baseball cap, and long hair. The man was seen walking away from car around the same time the 911 call was made. He was heading in the opposite direction, which made it essential for investigators to track his next move. Unfortunately, their attempt to follow him was thwarted when they discovered that he turned a corner where there was no surveillance camera. The investigators rewatched the footage multiple times, hoping to pick up on a detail they might have missed initially. The police had difficulty gathering clear information about the man in the recording because it was taken at night. However, interviewing witnesses provided new leads. A neighbor reported seeing Adrienne and a man running past his house on the sidewalk at night. This was unusual for two reasons. It was late, and they didn't appear to be going for a run. Adrienne was wearing a dress and holding her shoes, while the man was not dressed in athletic attire. Although the situation seemed suspicious, Adrienne didn't appear to be in distress, as she wasn't screaming or calling for help. As a result, the neighbor didn't think much of the incident at the time. To reconstruct the events leading up to the 911 call, investigators spoke with Adrienne's roommate, Jay. Jay had gone to the club with Adrienne and claimed to have found her on the bathroom floor. During questioning, Jay told the detective that he and Adrienne had a few drinks at home before heading to Diamond Dolls, a club they often visited to unwind and escape their daily problems. Jay told investigators that he and Adrienne walked to Diamond Dolls because they had been drinking and didn't want to drive. The police focused on the club because it attracted a questionable crowd. Jay claimed they arrived around 10:30 p.m. and stayed for several hours. While they were sitting at a table, a stranger with a beard and a baseball cap joined them. Later, Adrienne decided to leave, and Jay said he stayed behind. He noticed the stranger had also left. To verify Jay's story, investigators reviewed the club's surveillance footage. They found a camera with a wide angle that recorded everyone entering and leaving the club that evening. The footage showed Jay and Adrienne arriving at the club, appearing calm and normal. Another camera at the entrance provided a clear view of people's faces and clothing. CCTV footage confirmed Jay's account of events. It shows him leaving the club alone at 2:53 a.m. and walking towards his house. The footage also reveals that Adrienne left the club earlier, at 1:38 a.m. Notably, she was seen wearing a dress and what appeared to be a jacket when she arrived at the club, but only wore the dress when leaving. This discrepancy raises a key point. Shortly after Adrienne departed, a man wearing a baseball cap rushed out of the club, presumably to return the jacket she had left behind. After returning the jacket, the man and Adrienne appeared to be engaged in conversation. The exact topic of their discussion remains unclear. Rather than returning to the club, the man followed Adrienne. After exiting the parking lot, they turned right onto seen on camera at the club, and the man near seen on camera at the club and the man near Adrienne's abandoned car were two different individuals. Based on the circumstances surrounding her death, they believe the man from the club's CCTV footage was the likely culprit. The other man may have been an innocent bystander. The police were exploring all possible scenarios to provide answers to Adrienne's parents as soon as possible. Adrienne's family traveled to Florida to collect her belongings. Investigators met with her parents, Mark and Dolores, and assured them that they would do everything possible to find and bring the perpetrator to justice. According to her parents, Adrienne was a friendly person with no known enemies. She had a good relationship with her boyfriend, Justin, and her roommate, Jay. Investigators suspected that Adrienne did not know her killer. The laboratory report soon arrived, revealing that male DNA was found on the sheet, Adrienne's body, and the walls. Although the killer had attempted to destroy evidence by cutting out part of the sheet, forensic experts were still able to recover the DNA. However, when the investigators compared the DNA to the database, they were disappointed to find no matches. As a result, the police had the DNA of an unknown suspect in CCTV footage from the club where Adrienne spent her last evening. Detectives focused on the footage as the key to solving the case. They examined the recordings, this time reviewing both daytime and nighttime footage, which led to a breakthrough. Approximately 8 hours before Adrienne's death, investigators spotted the same man who had been talking to Adrienne in the parking lot and had left with her. This time, they got a clearer view of his face. To determine how the unknown man arrived at the club, investigators reviewed the footage and saw that he had taken a taxi. The taxi's phone number was visible on the recording, making it easy to identify the taxi company. This new information made it simpler to identify the man. Detectives discovered that the phone number that ordered the taxi was caught on footage near Diamondals, and it belonged to Thomas Frederick. By comparing his driver's license photo with the image of the man on the CCTV footage, detectives confirmed that it was the same person. As a result, Thomas Frederick became the primary suspect in the case. The police required concrete evidence to arrest Frederick, but the surveillance footage alone was insufficient. To gather more evidence without alerting him, they began secretly monitoring his activities. Their goal was to obtain his DNA sample discreetly, as they were concerned that approaching him directly might scare him off. For a week and a half, the officers tracked Frederick's movements, following him to work and keeping a watchful eye on his home at night. Their patience eventually paid off when Frederick discarded a cigarette butt on the road. The officers collected the butt and sent it to a laboratory for DNA analysis. The purpose of the test was to determine if Frederick's DNA matched the samples found at the residence of Adrian Robert. While waiting for the test results, the police continued to secretly monitor Frederick, as they suspected he might attempt to leave the state at any moment. After receiving the laboratory report, everyone's anticipation was met with an unsurprising conclusion. The DNA analysis revealed that the samples found on the sheet, walls, and Adrian's body all belonged to Thomas Frederick. As a result, the police arrested and brought him in for questioning. During the interrogation, Frederick claimed to be a frequent visitor to various clubs and bars, where he would often meet new people. When shown a picture of Adrienne, he stated that they had met at Diamond Dolls, where she had bought him a drink and they had danced and talked. However, when the police confronted him with CCTV footage that contradicted his alibi, he changed his story. Frederick then claimed that he and Adrian had walked together to the end of the street before parting ways. When asked if he had ever visited Adrian's house, Frederick responded that he couldn't remember due to his intoxication. This inconsistency cast doubt on his entire account, leaving it unclear what he was trying to conceal. The man initially claimed he had no recollection of being at Adrienne's house. However, it was revealed that a witness had seen Adrienne running barefoot while the man chased after her, which suggested that he was lying. When questioned by the investigators, Frederick provided an explanation. He claimed that Adrienne asked him to escort her home and that she began running suddenly after deciding she was in a hurry. She took off her shoes, prompting him to chase after her in order to stay by her side. Despite Frederick's shifting story, detectives uncovered compelling evidence. A DNA test showed that Frederick's DNA was on Adrienne's sheet and numerous items throughout her home. Frederick altered his story after receiving the DNA test results. Now he's claiming self-defense when confronted about his inconsistent explanations. Suddenly remembering past events he couldn't previously recall, Frederick finally shared an apparently factual narrative about how things actually occurred. They spent an intimate time in Adrienne's home where things ultimately became grim and both engaged. A confrontation between Adrienne and Thomas Frederick turned violent and resulted in a physical fight. During the altercation, Adrienne pulled out a knife and threatened Frederick, who then defended himself. Unfortunately, Adrienne was fatally injured in the process. After the incident, Frederick panicked and fled the scene instead of calling for emergency assistance. He feared being blamed for Adrienne's death. As a result, Frederick was charged with first-degree deprivation of life and appeared in court in January 2014. During the trial, the prosecutor presented according to the prosecution, Adrienne and her friend Jay had been drinking at home before heading to Diamond Dolls, where they met Frederick. The three of them socialized and chatted casually. However, the next day, Adrienne decided to leave the club early to move into her new home with her partner, Justin. Frederick allegedly took advantage of the situation and followed her. Despite her attempts to evade him, he chased her to her home, broke in, and attacked her with a knife from the kitchen. The prosecutor stated that the injuries on Adrienne's body suggested that she was forced to have intercourse with Frederick. Fearing she would report him to the police, Frederick decided to kill her. In an attempt to cover his tracks, he cut out a portion of the sheet where his semen had stained, but this effort was unsuccessful. The police were still able to find his DNA on multiple surfaces, including Adrienne's body. Frederick then took Adrienne's car keys, drove a short distance, and abandoned the vehicle. During the medical examiner's testimony, Adrienne's parents, Mark and Dolores Robert, left the courtroom, unable to bear the details of their daughter's final moments. Mark Robert later explained, "I didn't want to hear that. It won't bring Adrienne back, and I didn't want to know what she endured." It was clear that Adrienne had put up a fierce struggle. Her parents have since struggled to cope with life without their daughter. The grieving family member acknowledged that the healing process would be a long and difficult one. "We're still reeling from the loss of our loved one, and it will take time to recover," Dolores said. "However, we will eventually rebuild our lives, as that's what Adrienne would have wanted. It won't be easy, but we will get through this." During the trial, the defense team attempted to tarnish Adrienne's reputation by claiming that she had invited Thomas Frederick to her home for consensual sex. However, this assertion is baseless and may have been a desperate attempt by the perpetrator to justify his presence at the victim's house. The evidence, however, tells a different story. The presence of DNA points to one person, Thomas Frederick. The defense also claimed that Frederick acted in self-defense. She did sustain a stab wound as he was fighting her. Thomas Frederick was found guilty of first-degree murder and car theft. His claim of self-defense was rejected due to insufficient evidence. Although he was accused of killing Adrienne, there was no evidence to suggest he forced her into a sexual act by threatening her with a knife. Thomas Frederick, 25, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Adrienne's father expressed relief and satisfaction with the verdict, stating that while it wouldn't bring his daughter back, justice had been served. He found it difficult to remain calm in the presence of the man who murdered his daughter, especially since Frederick showed no remorse or sympathy even after the verdict was read. Adrienne's parents, Mark and Dolores Robert, were overcome with emotion in the courtroom, but felt a sense of relief and happiness when the verdict was announced. They remembered their daughter, a always happy and lively person whose smile could light up a room, and expressed sadness that they would never see her again. Shakaya Blue Harding was born November 28, 1998 and went by the name Blue. She lived in Billings, Montana, and as a teenager, she would unfortunately suffer from mental illness and drug addiction. She was last seen at the age of 19 on the afternoon of July 23, 2018, walking along Buena Vista Road in Billings. The next day, Blue posted a series of Facebook posts expressing that she was upset about a failed relationship. Amongst other things in her life, she posted her final post shortly before midnight, which reads, "All of her social media activity ceased after that, and her family hasn't seen or heard from her again." Her family reports that they had a strained relationship with her prior to her disappearance due to her erratic behavior, but her mother feels like she is still alive. In the months leading up to her disappearance, she was reportedly living on the streets of Billings. However, she always kept in touch with her family. Finally, on August 20, 2018, her mother reported her missing after a month went by with no word from her daughter. Her sister explained that due to her sister's transient lifestyle and the fact that she had disappeared and returned before, her family did not file an official missing persons report until almost a month later, thinking she would eventually turn up. Her family feels like Blue's case has been ignored due to her drug use and the fact that it took them so long to realize she was missing. There is unfortunately very little information available in her case. Reports state that she has ties to Fort Riley, Kansas, New Mexico, and Montana, but it is unclear if she has been spotted in those areas. Her family members are concerned for her safety and are desperately seeking answers. There was a possible sighting of her in Arizona in late 2020, but that has never been corroborated. Indigenous people, especially Native women, go missing at a vast disproportionate rate as the general population. Native Americans make up 6.7% of Montana's population, but they account for 26% of missing persons reported in 2016 to 2018. Two-thirds of those cases involve women and girls. The circumstances of her disappearance are unclear, but her loved ones are very concerned and seek answers, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Humans are inherently doubtful and covetous beings. When confronted with perfection, their instinct is to seek out imperfections. In the absence of any, they often endeavor to fabricate them. The calamity to be recounted today was observed by a vast audience, yet no one was able to assist the seemingly flawless girl, who as a result became handicapped. Tsinghua University, often referred to as the Chinese Harvard, was hosting a distinguished performance in partnership with the Beijing Symphony Orchestra. This event held significant prominence. Gracefully attired pairs made their entrance into the majestic theater, men in impeccably cut black suits adorned with gleaming cufflinks, and women in stunning full-length gowns clutching petite handbags. They exchanged smiles and engaged in polite conversations as they proceeded to their seats. Tsinghua University students poised to showcase their talent that evening faced immense pressure. One student, Zhu Ling, was confronting an especially daunting challenge. She was about to deliver a 6-minute solo poised to be the defining 6 minutes of her life. The audience potentially included professors, prospective future employers, and benefactors, all key figures for her career prospects, heightening the stakes. Any error or mishap was not an option. She needed to captivate them and leave a lasting impression with her performance. Her goal was to immerse herself in the rhythm and embody the essence of the ancient Chinese musical instrument, the jichuan. Revered as the instrument of the wise and favored by literati and intellectuals, those who mastered it were invariably seen as genial and perceptive. The jichuan, a symbol of prestige, boasts a rich history. One of these venerable instruments from the Song dynasty fetched $22 million, ranking it among the most valuable. To soothe Ling's nerves, numerous friends positioned themselves near the stage, their anxiety nearly matching hers, having witnessed all she had endured over the past 2 months. For this moment, Zhu Lingling's entire existence up to now had been devoted to these 6 minutes. She had almost jeopardized her well-being for this event. Her nerves were so frayed that in 3 days preceding her solo, she scarcely consumed any food. Stress-induced stomach pains plagued her, and sleep was elusive, making it hard for her to keep her eyes. Her vision began to blur. Finally, Zhu Lingling ascended the stage, greeted the audience with a bow, sat down, and commenced playing the jichuan. In those initial moments, her friends held their breath, but soon the tension eased, and they found themselves enveloped in the music. Zhu Lingling's stage presence that evening betrayed no sign of her nerves. She seemed to become one with the melody. Her hands glided effortlessly, coaxing out exquisite sounds that resonated throughout the theater. Some of her friends were even brought to tears. It appeared that Zhu Lingling had channeled all her accumulated stress and anxiety of the past 2 months into her performance, transforming it into a form of emotional release. As the 6 minutes concluded, the audience burst into applause. Zhu Lingling gave a deep bow, offered a smile, and exited the stage. Unbeknownst to her, her best friend was in the crowd smiling broadly and clapping so vigorously that her hands turned red. Yet her expression also showed a hint of nervousness. That night, Zhu Lingling opted out of the festivities to return home and rest. The dissipation of stress left her feeling utterly drained. In the shower, she began washing her hair calmly. Glancing at her hand, she noticed a clump of hair passing through it. Running her hand through her hair again brought a sense of urgency. She pulled back the shower curtain and dashed to the mirror. Her reflection revealed an exhausted face and small, irregular bald spots resembling the aftermath of a carelessly wielded razor. This was merely the onset. In the following weeks, Zhu Lingling's condition would deteriorate further, leaving her confined to a wheelchair and bereft of ability, unable to move, speak, or even control facial muscles. She transformed from a highly promising Tsinghua University student into someone with the cognitive capacity of a 6-year-old child. This entire wasn't an illness, nor was it a genetic anomaly. Zhu Ling was experiencing something caused by another individual. For ordinary students, gaining admission to Harvard was more likely than to Tsinghua, especially for those native to China. The local acceptance rate stands at a mere 0.4%, making it more accessible to international students. The university operates on an annual budget of $5 billion. It's an institution where influential political figures' daughters and wealthy businessmen's sons receive their education. Each of them is exceptionally intelligent and well-educated, with high intellectual capacities. The real challenge isn't just in securing admission. It's surviving the intense competition and rivalry among the students. Some alumni have admitted that to stay at the forefront, they engaged in various manipulations, betraying comrades, engaging in deceit, and stabbing others in the back, all driven by the unyielding competitive spirit fostered at this institution. In 1994, Zhu Ling was among the 31 chemistry undergraduates at Tsinghua University. She ranked in the top 3 of her cohort, which consisted of 20 males and 11 females. Zhu Ling was often regarded as the epitome of excellence, the cream of the crop among students. Indeed, Zhu Ling was not only intelligent, but also tall and striking in appearance. Everyone foresaw a bright future for her, destined for significant accomplishments. Zhu Ling also had a charismatic and assured presence. Her arrival in the dormitory sparked envy among others. She had a knack for attracting a circle of friends and admirers, thanks to her warm demeanor towards others. She roamed the campus, attended lectures diligently, completed her assignments, and many marveled at her seemingly boundless energy. However, after a few months, a peculiar and unexplainable decline in Zhu Ling's condition began to be observed by all. She appeared less strained, even during graduation week. But suddenly, Zhu Ling seemed to vanish. She began arriving later than her peers, and consistently looked exhausted in lectures. Sitting there, she'd sweat as if overheating. Zhu Ling struggled to concentrate on the class content. Severe stomach pain plagued her, leading many, including her instructors, to believe it was related. Seeking relief, Zhu Ling went to the school clinic for pain relievers, but they provided minimal respite. What started as minor lateness escalated to her ceasing classes entirely. Concerned friends decided to visit her dormitory, which she shared with 3 other girls. They found her in bed, shivering and moaning in agony, with clumps of dark hair scattered on the pillow. Alarmed, Her classmates urged her to consult a physician, but Zhu Ling dismissed their concerns. She insisted she was merely stressed and would return to classes the next day, assuring them that everything would normalize by semester's end. The once impeccable Zhu Ling was now unrecognizable. Her complexion had turned ghostly pale, lips took on a purplish tint. She resembled a specter haunting the campus. Her movements were sluggish. Each step seemed to inflict excruciating pain. Most of her hair had shed, leaving her nearly bald and compelling her always to wear something on her head for concealment. Occasionally, Zhu Ling's vision would blur, leading to temporary blindness for hours at a time. Various hypotheses regarding Zhu Ling's deteriorating condition spread across campus. Some conjectured it might be due to cancer or alopecia, known for causing hair loss or perhaps an autoimmune disorder. Yet darker speculations emerged. Many students linked Zhu Ling's decline to stress stemming from a dispute with her close friend Sunny. It seemed oddly coincidental that the change in Zhu Ling coincided with their falling out. After missing an orchestra rehearsal for a challenging piece, Zhu Ling faced unexpectedly harsh criticism. Sunny Fly informed the instructor that Zhu Ling had skipped because she felt overly skilled, implying the others needed to elevate their abilities to match hers. Realizing such maliciousness in real life was quite overwhelming for Zhu Ling. Different speculations circulated among university students. Some hinted that Zhu Ling, being a chemistry student, might be secretly conducting groundbreaking experiments. However, would a highly driven student risk self-harm? Beijing A, from Peking University, and a friend since middle school, decided to visit her in the hospital with a fruit basket. On entering her room, Beijing was stunned and compelled to flee. It wasn't fear of infection, but rather seeing his classmate in such a dire state that overwhelmed him. How could a vibrant 20-year-old transform into the shadow so quickly? What illness could strip Zhu Ling of all she had worked for? The medical team found her condition baffling. Just months earlier, Zhu Ling had been in peak health. Now she lay almost hairless, connected to multiple machines with tubes protruding from her nose and mouth. Her body convulsed and face showed partial paralysis. A look of silent desperation marked her wide eyes. The sight was distressing. Even the slightest touch caused excruciating pain and more erratic movements. It seemed even her hospital gown tormented her skin. Sensing his friend's silent plea for help, Beijing read the desperate message in her eyes, a look he would never forget. Seeking answers alongside Zhu Ling's parents, Beijing probed the doctors for a diagnosis, but they were equally perplexed. They delved into the onset of her illness. Initially, about a month or two earlier, Zhu Ling experienced stomach aches, resembling spasms which came and went unpredictably within a week. The pain intensified to the point that it forced her to bend over in agony. Often, she would lay on the ground curled up in a fetal position. Initially, her remedy involved consuming large amounts of Chinese herbal tea. Yet the pain escalated, eventually causing her to lose consciousness. Zhu Ling, burdened by her demanding university schedule, delayed seeking medical attention, hoping the symptoms would subside. Then, her vision began failing intermittently, first blurring and then completely vanishing for hours. Subsequently, her hair started falling out, an especially traumatic symptom for any young woman. The situation deteriorated further, leading to her hospitalization just days before Christmas. It was her first time in hospital care. During that month, her parents remained steadfast by her side as she received treatment. The medical team tested her for arsenic and mercury poisoning. However, the results showed nothing abnormal. Intriguingly, a doctor from a different hospital recalled a similar poisoning case from the 1960s and suggested the possibility of thallium poisoning. However, Zhu Ling denied any exposure to thallium in her studies. The hospital then reached out to Tsinghua University to investigate which chemical substances Zhu Ling might have encountered in her capacity as a chemistry student. Despite this inquiry, her medical records revealed no exposure to chemicals that could trigger such symptoms. This left her condition an enigma to the medical staff. Remarkably, after a month, Zhu Ling's health appeared to improve, and she requested permission to resume her studies. She was eager to sit for exams and anxious not to waste the entire semester. Her parents were adamantly opposed to her returning to university, fearing that stress was the underlying cause of her illness. Yet Zhu Ling feigned significant recovery and went back to classes in February. Unfortunately, by March, her condition had deteriorated dramatically again, resulting in readmission to the hospital, this time so debilitated that continued university attendance seemed impossible. She couldn't even speak. Jean, disillusioned with the local medical community's inability to provide answers, took the initiative. He reached out to medical experts not just in China, but globally. Zhu Ling's symptoms were translated various languages, and he posted these on specialized medical forums online. In less than half an hour, he received his response. Over the next few days, around 2,000 emails poured in from 18 different countries. The respondents weren't mere internet users. Many were affiliated with national medical institutions and specialized in toxicology. The consensus among almost all of them was alarming. Thallium poisoning. The symptoms pointed to a deliberate, methodical attempt to poison Zhu Ling, designed to inflict slow, excruciating agony. Thallium, a dense and highly poisonous metal, was once used in rat poisons, but has been banned in major countries including China and the USA. In the early 20th century, it was used as a lice treatment known to cause hair loss. Its array of symptoms is so vast that it often leads to misdiagnosis by doctors, and its detection is usually alarmingly delayed. Thallium doesn't leave visible marks like bruises or wounds, making it harder to spot. The poisoning unfolds in stages. Initial stomach discomfort escalates to severe pain, then trembling, headaches, insomnia, and temporary blindness. Subsequently, the victim experiences intense skin pain, akin to severe burns, where even the slightest touch feels excruciating. Clothing and bed linens become sources of torment. The final stage involves neurological symptoms, including involuntary motor disturbances, seizures, and partial or complete paralysis, culminating in cognitive decline and mental impairment. Tragically, in Zhu Ling's case, this meant a regression from a top student at China's most prestigious university to possessing the mental capacities of a 6-year-old child. BG Zhen, in collaboration with Zhu Ling's parents, sifted through the multitude of emails and promptly conveyed their findings to Zhu Ling's medical team. Yet the doctors were skeptical of the diagnosis posited by online contributors. They emphasized that detecting thallium in the body without specific tests was not feasible. Testing for thallium involved sending the patient's blood to a lab equipped for such an analysis. Moreover, they pointed out that thallium is a rare, tightly controlled substance, not easily obtainable. The doctors also mentioned that if Zhu Ling's condition was indeed due to thallium poisoning, an antidote would likely be ineffective at this advanced stage of the disease. This revelation left Zhu Ling's family and friends in shock. The pressing question then became, who would want to harm Zhu Ling? A hypothesis emerged that the intended targets might have been her parents, given their high-profile occupations. Her father was a senior engineer at the national agency, a position that could involve sensitive information. Her mother was an engineer at a prominent Chinese company. However, this line of inquiry eventually reached a dead end. The primary task was to determine how the poison entered Zhu Ling's system, especially since no one else on campus exhibited similar symptoms. This ruled out the possibility of thallium vapors, suggesting that Zhu Ling either ingested or came into direct contact with the substance. Meanwhile, during Zhu Ling's hospitalization, her personal items were mysteriously stolen from her dormitory. The stolen items included her shampoo, contact lens case, lipstick, bath soap, and even her water glass. Intriguingly, the perpetrator seemed solely interested in Zhu Ling's possessions, an unusual incident in such a prestigious university's dormitory. With no surveillance cameras on campus at that time, an investigation was imperative. Students lived in gender-specific rooms, and access to the women's dormitory was restricted to current female students of Singer University. Neither alumni nor graduate students or professors had entry into the living quarters of over 100 young female students. Police initiated a thorough investigation into over 20 vendors known to supply thallium, a substance still used in manufacturing optical lenses, electronics, and other products. Scrutinizing their procurement records, they discovered that one supplier had provided alum to Tsinghua University's chemistry department for research. The investigation revealed that only a select group within the university had access to this compound: 2 professors, 3 graduate students, and 2 senior undergraduates. Consequently, the perpetrator likely had a role in thallium-based experiments and had the opportunity to take personal items from Zhu Ling's room. As the investigation progressed, the professors and graduate students were quickly excluded as suspects due to their lack of access to the women's dormitory. This narrowed suspicion to the 2 senior students, 1 male and 1 female. Since the male student couldn't have entered the female residence area, suspicion fell on the female student. Astonishingly, this student was none other than Sun Wei, also known as Sunny. She was not only Zhu Ling's best friend and roommate, but now the prime suspect in her attempted murder. The situation posed a question. Why would Sunny, with a bright future ahead, risk everything in such a serious manner? Acquaintances of both young women mentioned that Zhu Ling had recently triumphed over Sunny in the student elections. Sunny was not known for tolerating defeat gracefully. She possessed an argumentative nature and had deceived her closest companion on several occasions. As Zhu Ling advanced and received greater acclaim, Sunny grew progressively more agitated. Zhu Ling's individual performance at the Beijing Philharmonic served as a catalyst for tension in their relationship. Zhu Ling was attractive, highly skilled, and esteemed by both peers and faculty members alike. This probably fueled Sunny's jealousy even more. Sun Wei was questioned for 8 hours straight before her parents came to take her home. Her family had significant influence at Tsinghua University. Her father played a key role in the Democratic Revolutionary Committee, and her grandfather was a former vice chairman. Many of her relatives held positions in government or academic roles at top state universities. Consequently, Zhu Ling's case remained unresolved for quite some time. Sun Wei, one of the primary individuals associated with the incident, maintained her innocence. She claimed that the police had cleared her of any suspicion. Regardless, Sun Wei legally changed her name and birth date, married an American, and relocated to the US, where she lived without restrictions. Meanwhile, Ling's diagnosis came too late. It was eventually confirmed that thallium had caused her mysterious illness. By the time it was detected, the levels of thallium in her body were extraordinarily high. The antidote, Prussian blue, proved ineffective due to the advanced stage of poisoning. Ling was declared permanently disabled with irreversible nerve damage. She now has a child's mental capacity, experiences facial paralysis, and is bound to a wheelchair. Later on, Ling's family received $14,000 from the hospital due to misdiagnosis and mishandling of her case. The closure of the case by the police occurred quietly without notifying Ling's family, which only added to their tragedy and suspicions. Zhu Ling lived until she was 50 years old before passing away. Her parents found solace in the fact that she could live so long in such a state. Unfortunately, the individual responsible for her condition was never brought to justice. Declan Ford was born October 9, 2014. As an infant, he lived with his mother, 28-year-old Brittany Ford, and his father in the state of Georgia. In April 2015, Brittany called the police at 3:30 in the morning and claimed Declan's father was abusing him. The police responded to the home and advised Brittany to take the baby and stay somewhere else for the night. She agreed and said she would go to a hotel, but instead, she took Declan and began traveling in her white 2007 Nissan Versa to Columbus, Ohio, where her mother lived. While on her drive to Ohio, she called her mother and said the government was coming after her and she had to get away. Strangely, when she arrived at her mother's, she would accuse her stepfather of abusing her younger sister. Brittany's mother and brother thought she might be suffering from some kind of mental illness and took her to the hospital. She was then admitted to the psychiatric ward. Declan's father went to Ohio and tried to visit her, but she refused to see him. On April 19th, after 3 days in the hospital, was released and went to stay with her brother. A few days later, when her brother woke up, Brittany and Declan were gone. She said she was going out to get some food, but never returned. Her family would report her missing on May 7, 2015. On May 14th, a police officer in Indiana, unaware that Brittany and Declan were reported missing, helped her change a tire on her car. On May 16th, Brittany called her brother from Iowa and asked for $10,000. On May 17th, her car was found abandoned on the side of Highway 87 between Billings, Montana and Sheridan, Wyoming. All of her belongings, including her medication and the baby's car seat, were still inside. They were last known to be in the area of Hardin, Montana. There has been no indication of their whereabouts since her car was found abandoned, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. The 1980s marked a period of growth and development in Tampa Bay, Florida. In 1989, Tampa was already a popular tourist destination with beautiful beaches and diverse attractions like Busch Gardens and the Salvador Dali Museum. The region experienced economic growth with sectors such as tourism, agriculture, shipping, and manufacturing contributing to its prosperity. And amidst this prosperous tourism hotspot, some tourists noticed 3 dead bodies floating in the sea on June 4, 1989. Joan Jo Rogers was born on November 12, 1952, to Wilhelm and Virginia Etzler. Later, she married Hal Rogers, and they settled on a farm in Wilshire, Ohio, living an idyllic life. On February 22, 1972, their first daughter, Michelle, was born. And on October 6, 1974, their second daughter, Christy, was born. Hal and Joan Rogers regularly took good care of their animals. Their daughters, Michelle and Christy, loved the animals on the farm and found great joy in their happy life. Despite the hard work on the farm, Michelle, even though she had some tough times, she always looked out for Christy. They both went to school, and Michelle had a boyfriend named Jeff Feesby. However, Michelle had been through something terrible involving her Uncle John, Hal's brother, who had once blindfolded Michelle and assaulted her. Hal and Joan didn't know about it until the police arrested John for attacking another woman from the same town. Due to the disturbing things Michelle had seen, she was very protective of her baby sister. Christy was a bubbling and outgoing girl. She was a cheerleader, loved softball, and was very close to her father. She looked up to Michelle, even though they had their arguments as sisters do. Michelle was sometimes jealous of the attention Christy got from their father, but despite her struggles, Michelle always cared for her little sister. The family faced many challenges on the farm, but Jo was the strongest. She worked long hours at 2 jobs and took care of the family and the animals. She was often exhausted, but she never stopped working. On Friday, May 26, 1989, 36-year-old Jo Rogers and her 2 daughters, 17-year-old Michelle and 15-year-old Christy, went on a long-awaited road trip to Florida. They left their farm in Ohio and were looking forward to enjoying a family vacation. Jo, who worked the night shift at a distribution center, was excited to give her girls their first vacation. They left Jo's husband, Hal, to take care of the farm and drove their Oldsmobile Calais south on Interstate 75. Their plans included visiting theme parks and enjoying the Florida sun. They visited the Jacksonville Zoo, Silver Springs, SeaWorld, Epcot, and Disney's MGM Studios, having a great time away from farm responsibilities. On June 1st, they reached the motel in Tampa and were thinking about going to Busch Gardens. Michelle called her boyfriend Jeff to have a conversation with him. At 12:57 p.m., the family made another call to Busch Gardens. At night, the Rogers women were seen happily dining at the motel's restaurant by a businessman. But after that evening, they mysteriously disappeared. The last photo they took in their motel was Michelle getting ready for their next adventure. Sadly, they never got to see the sunrise again. Hal Rogers anxiously waited for Jo and his daughters to return from their Florida vacation. Even though he hadn't heard from them for days, he tried to stay positive, hoping they were all right. As time passed, his worries grew and he wondered where they could be. On June 4, 1989, the Amber Waves, a sailboat returning to Tampa from Key West, spotted something troubling in the water. They saw what looked like a body of a woman floating face down. Her hands were tied behind her back, her feet bound, and a thin yellow rope was around her neck. She was unclothed from the waist down. Someone on the Amber Waves radioed the Coast Guard, and a rescue boat was sent from the Bayboro Harbor Station in St. Petersburg. The Coast Guard crew located the body and had difficulty retrieving it. There was something heavy attached to the rope around her neck, making it hard to bring her up. They noted the location and cut the line around her neck, placing her in a body bag before heading back to the station. However, before reaching the shore, they received another distressing message. Another female body had been spotted by 2 people on a sailboat. This time it was 2 miles off the pier in St. Petersburg. Like the first body, this one was also face down, bound with a rope around the neck and naked from the waist down. The same Coast Guard crew went to recover it. As they were dealing with the second body, another call came in, a third female floating on a short distance away to the east. Once the third body was also recovered, all 3 bodies were brought to the Coast Guard station for examination and to be photographed by the arriving investigators from the Florida Marine Patrol. They were in a state of decomposition, making identification challenging. The women's hands and feet were tied in a similar manner, and the second woman had managed to free one hand before dying. Duct tape covered their mouths, and the second and third bodies had concrete blocks tied to the ropes around their necks. It was believed that the first body also had a concrete block tied to its rope. Detectives suspected that the woman may have been assaulted and then thrown alive into the water with concrete blocks tied to their necks, causing them to drown. The discovery of the 3 murdered women shocked the community, leading to a massive investigation. Divers searched the waters for evidence, and police boats looked for more bodies in the bay. Autopsies were conducted to find out how they died and gather more clues. Since the bodies had no IDs, detectives tried to identify them through their clothing and jewelry. One of the women, the oldest, had long brown hair and was found in a black t-shirt with a gold wedding band on her left hand. Another had medium-length brown hair, wore a peach-colored shirt and had 3 cloth bracelets with pink, green, and white stripes on her left wrist. The third woman, the youngest, had wavy brown hair and was dressed in a black tank top over a blue bikini top. She had 4 rings on her left hand, 2 gold and 2 silver, 1 on each finger. The struggle she put up allowed her to free one hand from the rope around her wrist. While Joe Rogers' husband, Hal, waited anxiously at the farm, he grew more worried as the days passed without any news from Joe and the girls. He called Joe's friends and relatives to check if they had heard from her, confirmed with her boss at the distribution center about her return date, and reported them missing to the authorities, but nobody had any information. Then, early one night that week, Jeff Feasby, Michelle's boyfriend, called Hal. He had received a postcard from Michelle with a picture of a girl in a bikini and a bull gator and the words "Fun Times in Florida" on the front. Hal asked Jeff to bring it to the house. As he read the postcard repeatedly, he couldn't find any clues about what might have happened. Feeling desperate and determined to do something, he went to his bank on Wednesday and withdrew some money. He had a plan in mind. Hal decided to conduct his own search from the air. He would find a private plane and a pilot, and together they would fly over the roads that Joe and the girls had taken from Ohio to Florida. On Thursday, June 8th, the maid at the Days Inn Tampa noticed something strange about room 251. The guest had checked in a week ago, but the room seemed untouched since then. The beds were neat, the bathroom was unused, and personal items were left behind. The maid became suspicious and shared her concerns with the hotel's general manager. They decided to call the Tampa police to report the guest might be missing, especially given the recent news about the 3 bodies found in the bay. The Tampa police arrived and realized that the room could hold crucial information about the women's identities. They sealed off the room and called for support from detectives in both Tampa and St. Petersburg. The investigators carefully searched the room, taking photographs, collecting fingerprints, and examining all personal belongings. A technician matched the prints found in the room, including those on a tube of an Oral-B Sesame Street toothpaste with the prints taken from the bodies in the bay. It was confirmed that the room belonged to the same 3 women. Meanwhile, the detectives started to make initial identifications using the information found in their purses and the registration from the front desk. Once they identified that the 3 women were Joe, Michelle, and Christy, they now called Hal in Ohio. On that same day, 2 significant events occurred in Tampa Bay. Firstly, the police started looking for the car the women drove when coming to Florida. They were able to gather information about its make, model, and license plate from the motel registration form. Unfortunately, the car was not found in the Days Inn parking lot, so they expanded their search to the nearby areas and eventually located it at a boat ramp along the Courtney Campbell Parkway just a few miles away. The car seemed untouched since Joe and the girls had left it there a week ago. It was locked and the passenger seat was pushed forward as if someone had recently gotten out from the back seat. Inside the car, they found a Clearwater Beach brochure, a deck of Uno cards, and a puzzle book that someone had been working on in the back seat. On the front passenger seat, there was a piece of Days Inn stationery with directions written by Joe herself, guiding them from the motel to a boat ramp. The direction said, "Turn right, west on 62.5 miles on right side, alt before, bridge." Besides these words, there was one more instruction, blue with white. Now, one thing seemed likely. The individual responsible for this crime probably owned a blue and white boat. The second major breakthrough, which was quite shocking, occurred when one of the investigators received a call from the chief of detectives at the Van Wert County Sheriff's Office. The detective wanted to ensure that the team investigating the homicides knew all the relevant facts about the Rogers family. He shared information about Michelle and her uncle, John Rogers, who was now in prison for assaulting a woman. He had also previously blindfolded Michelle and assaulted her. Although John was in prison at the time of the murders, the investigators couldn't overlook the striking similarities between what happened to Michelle on the farm and the events in Tampa Bay. In both cases, Michelle seemed to have been bound and assaulted. This raised the possibility that John might have orchestrated the murders from behind bars, possibly arranging for someone with a boat to take them out on the water. To get a clearer picture, they needed to learn more about the Rogers family. Understanding Joe, Michelle, and Christy better could lead them to discover how they ended up on the bay that night. Alone was someone who intended to harm them. The very next day after identifying the bodies, 2 detectives flew to Ohio to delve deeper into the Rogers family. The detectives questioned Hal about his brother, John Rogers. Hal clearly stated that John was a loner, and at the time of the missing and eventual death of the Rogers women, he was in jail. There was no way he could plan a murder from inside the cell, as he had no connections with his prison mates. But during their inquiries, the detectives discovered unsettling information about Hal himself. They learned that Hal had posted John's bail when he was accused of assaulting a woman, and despite later learning about the allegations involving Michelle, he kept his word to support John. Hal explained that he wanted to keep peace within the family and believed that someone was lying. He had also said that he had already promised Joe that he would pay for his bail before he knew about the Michelle incident, and so he had kept his word. Another peculiar incident was a $7,000 cash withdrawal Hal made while the girls were missing. He explained that he needed the money to search for his family in Florida, as he didn't believe in credit cards. However, before he could carry out his plan, he learned of their deaths. After numerous interviews with Hal, the detectives found no concrete evidence implicating him in the murders. They observed his grief-stricken demeanor and accepted his explanation for the bond and the cash withdrawal. When the detectives asked him where the $7,000 went, Hal took them to the back of his truck. Inside it was a bag that had $6,000, and the rest was in Hal's pocket. After interviews in Ohio, detectives cleared Hal and John Rogers as suspects in the Florida murders. In October 1989, lead detective John Capel discovered a crucial lead while going through a bulletin from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. The bulletin mentioned an assault on a 24-year-old Canadian woman off Madeira Beach that occurred on May 15, 1989, just 2 weeks before the Rogers women were murdered. The description of the attacker's bow matched the Rogers women were last seen in. Capel and another detective flew to Canada to interview the victim and became convinced that the same man responsible for the assault was likely involved in the Rogers murder. The Canadian woman had met a man named David Posner at 7 to 11 in Madeira Beach. He was older, had tint windows on his dark-colored four-wheel-drive vehicle, and claimed to own an aluminium company and lived in Bradenton. He offered to take her on a boat ride the next afternoon. When she arrived, her friend decided not to go, so she went alone. After a seemingly pleasant trip, the man's demeanor changed and he assaulted her. He threatened her, bound her with duct tape, and forced her to comply. When they returned to the shore, he even apologized for his actions. The woman was able to escape and provided the detectives with enough information to create a composite sketch of her attacker. Back in Florida, the detectives realized there was no individual named David Posner who matched the attacker's description. They decided to release the composite drawing and description of the man, his boat, and his vehicle to the public. This resulted in 400 tips pouring in, leading to a surge of activity in the investigation. However, despite their efforts, none of the leads seemed to pan out, and the case hit another dead end. As time passed, the number of detectives assigned to the case dwindled. Nearly 6 months after the murders on December 23, 1989, the case seemed all but forgotten until Sergeant Glenn Moore took charge. Though lacking homicide experience, Moore refused to let the case fade away. He sought to reinvigorate the investigation, hoping to finally identify and apprehend the elusive suspect responsible for the heinous crimes. In October 1990, Joe and Steffi, a Tampa resident, saw a newspaper clipping of a composite drawing related to an assault case in Madeira Beach. She believed the sketch resembled one of her neighbors, a man who had recently moved in the area with his family. Despite feeling uneasy about him, Steffi hesitated to report her suspicions to the police, fearing involvement in the investigation. Later, during a chance encounter with a Hillsborough County Sheriff's deputy in her accounting class, Steffi confided in him about her neighbor's resemblance to the composite drawing. She asked the deputy to pass along the information without revealing her identity, hoping to remain uninvolved. Unfortunately, the tip somehow did not reach Sergeant Glenn Moore and his team, who were working on the Rogers murders case. They were overwhelmed with numerous tips and decided to utilize a new software called Holmes to organize their information better. They also sought assistance from the FBI's behavioral unit in Quantico. During this time, they interviewed Hal Rogers again and questioned around 70 people in Ohio to gain insights into the emotional states of Jo Rogers and her daughters. Meanwhile, a local newspaper, the Tribune, published an article pointing suspicions toward Hal Rogers, leading investigators to put Hal through a polygraph test to clear his name. After Hal passed the test, Sergeant Moore held a press conference to affirm that Hal was never a suspect but a victim in the case. It was 1991, around a year and a half passed since Jo and Steffi had shared her suspicions with the sheriff's deputy, but there had been no action taken yet. The man she found suspicious had already moved away with his family, having hardly interacted with others despite being amiable with people around him. The investigation into the Rogers murders continued, with Sergeant Moore sharing information received from Quantico during a press conference. Steffi's tip remained unaddressed as she wondered if the police were conducting background checks on the man she suspected. But again, gradually the case's progress was getting slower and slower. It was the spring of 1992. It had now been 3 years since the investigation started. The investigators had received 1,500 tips in this time, but still were nowhere close to identifying the assailant. However, they made progress in profiling the killer, concluding it was the work of a single man, based on the way the hands and legs were tied. They suspected that the person who gave directions to the Rogers family was the same individual who later lured them out. A distinctive handwriting on the directions prompted them to conduct a handwriting test. Sergeant Moore announced the new theory at a press conference, suggesting that the killers were likely charming, likable, and appeared respectable and harmless. Back in March 1992, Joe and Steffi's sister called the police to say that Steffi knew a man who resembled the suspect's sketches. The police tried to reach Steffi, but they couldn't get through. On May 14, 1992, it had almost been 2.5 years since Steffi had tipped the police about her neighbor. Now Steffi saw the news and Sergeant Moore's press conference in the newspaper and wondered if she should report her suspicion again. Steffi recalled her former neighbor, who was an aluminium contractor, and thought his handwriting might match the one in the composite sketch. She talked to Eileen Prisbis, a civilian investigator, about her neighbor, whose name was Oba Chandler in the contract, his boat, and his SUV. She found the contract in check from when Chandler built a port for her neighbor, Moselle Smith. Steffi compared the handwriting from the contract and the press conference clipping, and she was convinced it was the same. Steffi called the task force again and told Prisbis about the contract and handwriting. She wanted to provide a lead. They faxed the contract in check to the investigators, but the task force was dealing with a flood of tips, so it took time to look into Steffi's information, among the other leads. Meanwhile, the investigators used billboards to seek public help in finding the killer. Joe and Steffi and Moselle Smith had already shared their suspicions, but there was a backlog of tips. Frustrated, they sent the handwriting samples again, which now caught the attention of the task force. Investigator Prisbis reevaluated the writing, but couldn't make a definite match. The lead was handed to another investigator, J.J. Gogan, to follow up. On Friday, July 31st, Gogan visited Moselle Smith in Tampa to obtain the original contract related to Oba Chandler. Upon comparing the contract's handwriting with the directions on the brochure, the task force found strong similarities, leading them to consider Oba Chandler as a new suspect. They quickly gathered more information about him, discovering he was a 45-year-old man living with his family in Port Orange near Daytona Beach. Oba Chandler became a significant suspect in the investigation of the Rogers women's murders. At the time of the murders, he lived on Dalton Avenue, close to where Joe and the girls vanished, just 2 miles from the boat ramp. Records showed that he owned a 21-foot Bayliner boat with a blue and white interior and a dark blue Jeep Cherokee. He had an extensive criminal history, including charges of kidnapping, burglary, armed robbery, and counterfeiting. They compared a picture of Chandler with a composite sketch, and it was a perfect match. After 3 years of relentless investigation, Sergeant Moore was convinced they had their man. Another fact emerged. The man who had assaulted the Canadian woman before also owned an aluminium company, similar to Chandler's line of work as an aluminium contractor. To keep his real name hidden and avoid alerting Chandler, they referred to him as the Tin Man. The task force expanded rapidly, collaborating with the state attorney's office to build a strong case against Chandler. Chandler had a troubled past, with a history of crimes and a penchant for frightening and threatening people. Investigators spread across Florida and the Midwest collecting evidence against him. Born on October 11, 1946, in Cincinnati, Ober Jr. had a tumultuous childhood with his father taking his own life when he was young. He got into trouble early on, stealing cars and facing numerous arrests. As an adult, he faced a long list of charges, including possession of counterfeit money and armed robbery. Chandler married Deborah Ann Whiteman on May 14, 1988, just 10 days after she had divorced her husband. They bought a house on Dalton Avenue, close to Joe and Steffi, who later reported her suspicions about Chandler. Chandler's house had a canal leading to Tampa Bay, where he had a 21-foot bay liner boat during the time of the Rogers murders. He sold the boat shortly after the crimes. He also owned a dark blue Jeep Cherokee during the same period, resembling the vehicle described by the Canadian tourist who was assaulted. Investigators had now gathered enough evidence to consider Oba Chandler as the prime suspect in the Rogers women's murders. In the summer of 1990, as news about the Rogers investigation and its upcoming feature on Unsolved Mysteries spread, Chandler, his wife, and young daughter Whitney left their home on Dalton Avenue. They stopped making mortgage payments, leading the bank to foreclose and sell the house. Chandler moved to Florida's East Coast in July 1990, initially living in Broward County before settling in Port Orange near Daytona Beach. Despite his credit issues, by October 1991, he leased a house in his daughter's name. Chandler appeared normal to his neighbors, although they didn't know what he did for a living. Now, in 1992, investigators confirmed his handwriting and fingerprints matched evidence from the case, leading to surveillance of his new home with phone monitoring. In early September 1992, while other tasks were ongoing, two investigators, Detective Katie Connor-Dubina and FDLE agent John Halliday, traveled to Toronto to speak with the Canadian tourist who had been assaulted at the Madeira Beach in May 1989, just 2 weeks before the murders. The woman, now 27 and married, worked as a social worker. They showed her 6 pictures of different men and asked her to identify the person involved in the incident. When she saw the third photo, she became visibly upset and confirmed that this was her assaulter. The photograph featured Oba Chandler. She signed the photo and asked to turn it over as it was disturbing her. A large team of about 40 to 50 law enforcement officers from various agencies, including the St. Petersburg Police, FDLE, and the FBI, were now surveilling Chandler around the clock. They had a command post near his house with a video camera monitoring his driveway. Whenever Chandler left, multiple unmarked cars followed him, carefully rotating to avoid being noticed. The FBI provided 2 small planes that took turns tracking Chandler from above, ensuring they never lost sight of him. They communicated with the ground units using the radio, saying, "Eagle has the eyeball." After setting up surveillance, prosecutors arrived in Volusia County with an arrest warrant for Chandler on the charges of assault. Investigators planned to question him, showing photos of the victim to prompt him to talk to the FBI's Daytona Beach office. It was Thursday, September 17, 1992, the day that police had planned to question Chandler. That morning, just before Chandler was to be arrested, an unexpected event took place. As Chandler left his house in his blue Toyota Corolla, the surveillance teams debated whether to arrest him immediately or continue following him. They decided to keep trailing him, hoping he'd lead them to something significant. Chandler drove for a long time, and when he reached Lake City, the officers faced difficulties due to low fuel in the plane and a thunderstorm. They lost sight of Chandler in the heavy rain, and panic set in. They searched frantically but couldn't find him. Frustration and anger spread amongst the investigators, wondering if they missed their chance. They had to wait, monitoring Chandler's home, hoping he would return. Meanwhile, mysterious calls from Cincinnati and northern Kentucky added to the tension. The fear of Chandler potentially harming someone else haunted them. After losing Chandler for a week, the investigators received a call from Georgia, indicating he was returning. On September 24, 1992, they planned to arrest him without wasting any more time. Police waited for him on the I-95, but he took a different route. At a gas station in Port Orange, officers surrounded his car and arrested him for assault and battery. Back at the FBI office, they tried to make him talk, but he remained calm and asked for a lawyer. On the drive back to Pinellas County, Chandler talked casually with an FBI agent, even offering to provide information about a car scheme. The agent couldn't believe his audacity. Despite Chandler's complaints, his handcuffs remained secure. The next morning, Chandler had his initial hearing in a small courtroom at the Pinellas County Jail. The judge read the affidavit and kept bail at $1 million. Investigators found Chandler's blue and white Bayliner boat with a yellow Volvo engine. Inside his house in Port Orange, they discovered a mint green mesh shirt. The Canadian woman and her friend identified Chandler in a lineup. One of Chandler's many children, Crystal Mays, revealed that he visited her in 1989, admitting he was on the run for assault and possible killings. Her husband, Rick Mays, said Chandler confessed to assaulting women in his boat and throwing one overboard, mentioning he had murdered 3 women. With this new evidence, Chandler was indicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder in November, but the trial would not take place for another 2 years. It was the spring of 1994, several months before the trial was scheduled to begin. The prosecution now had access to Chandler's phone bills. While studying the bills, they noticed something strange. On May 15, 1989 and June 2, 1989, several collect calls were made to Chandler's house at specific times: 5:49 p.m. and 1:12 a.m., 1:30 a.m., 1:38 a.m., 8:11 a.m., and 9:52 a.m., respectively. All these calls were traced back to a special billing number, 813-223-0000, used for marine phone calls. The prosecution wanted to know who made these calls. They discovered that the calls had to be made through a marine phone operator, but unfortunately the records were destroyed. After persistent efforts, they found backup copies and were astonished to see that the May 15th call was made from a boat named Gypsy One, with the caller identifying himself as Oba. The June 2nd calls were also from Gypsy One, with the 5th call identifying the person as Obi. On September 19, 1994, Chandler's trial began. During the trial, the prosecution acted swiftly, calling around 20 witnesses each day. They presented evidence like the directions found on the brochure in Joe Rogers' car, the palm print on the brochure, and Chandler's call from his boat. Chandler's daughter Crystal Mays testified about his shocking confession in Cincinnati, where he admitted to physical assault and possibly murder. In jail, 2 witnesses had heard himself incriminate himself, talking about assaulting a foreign woman and mentioning the Rogers case. A laborer, Rollins Cooper, shared how Chandler spoke about a date with 3 women on the day of the disappearance. The Canadian tourist bravely testified about her terrifying encounter with Chandler. Hal Rogers, Michelle's husband, remained strong in court, thanking the brave Canadian woman. In a crowded courtroom, Chandler testified in his defense, appearing calm and composed. He confirmed meeting the Rogers family when they asked for directions to Days Inn in Tampa. He thought they meant a different one at first, but one of the girls clarified and directed them toward Rocky Point. Chandler explained that he was returning from a job estimate when he encountered them at a gas station near Interstate 4 in East Tampa. During his testimony, Oba Chandler denied any involvement in the murders and refuted allegations made by witnesses. He explained a fishing trip gone wrong on the night of June 1, 1989. After finishing fishing that night, Chandler encountered a problem with his boat. He attempted to start the engine, but it only sputtered briefly before stopping. Investigating further, he noticed a strong smell of gas and found that a fuel hose had burst, causing the entire 40-gallon tank to leak into the space beneath the boat's deck. Scott Hopkins, the investigator, noticed something odd in Chandler's testimony about the fuel leak in his boat. Knowing the boat well, Hopkins was certain Chandler was lying. He immediately informed the lead prosecutor during the lunch break, and a mechanic was sent to reinvestigate Chandler's boat. After the lunch break, the prosecutor wasted no time in beginning the cross-examination. Chandler reluctantly admitted to his past felony convictions, and the prosecutor pushed him about the murder accusations made by his daughter and son-in-law, to which Chandler invoked the Fifth Amendment. The prosecutors then questioned the events of June 1, 1989, and exposed contradictions in Chandler's story about the fuel leak and his whereabouts. Evidence revealed that Chandler had made calls from the water before getting help, challenging his claims of being at a different location. The prosecutor also confronted Chandler about his escape to Cincinnati after the composite drawing of the Madeira Beach suspect was released. Chandler tried to downplay his fear, but the prosecutor implied they might have found their suspect. During a crucial moment, the prosecution team informed the lead prosecutor of a breakthrough regarding Chandler's boat. The mechanic had returned after checking the boat. Armed with this information, he cornered Chandler, asking about the broken fuel line. Case of Jessica Patel. Jessica Patel was born on September 16, 1983 in Leeds, West Yorkshire, England, where she grew up in a traditional Hindu community. As the eldest child, she developed a diligent and obedient nature from a young age. Jessica excelled academically, helped with household chores, and maintained a bright and cheerful personality. Jessica had a large social circle, but she was particularly close to a boy 3 years, her senior, who was more reserved and shy. They often spent time together, and as Jessica matured, she blossomed into a beautiful young woman. Like many of her peers, she longed to find true love and build a happy family, much like the characters in her favorite movies. However, her romantic aspirations did not detract from her intelligence and determination. To achieve her goals, Jessica pursued higher education. In 2002, she enrolled at De Montfort University in Leicester, and 4 years later, she began studying pharmacy at the University of Manchester. There, she reconnected with Matei, an acquaintance who coincidentally attended the same faculty. They initially had no romantic feelings for each other, but over time, it turned into true love. This relationship has helped Mitesh grow and become more confident in himself. He is also accumulating knowledge and becoming more mature. Mitesh was extremely kind and caring towards Jessica, showering her with compliments and gifts. However, their happiness was short-lived. Jessica's mother passed away due to an incurable illness, leaving her devastated. Mitesh stood by Jessica's side, providing emotional support and comfort during this difficult time. As a result, their bond grew stronger. Jessica confided in her sister that she had finally found a trustworthy partner. Mitesh seemed perfect in every way and she envisioned a happy marriage. In 2008, Mitesh asked Jessica's father for permission to marry her following traditional Hindu customs. Although her father had reservations about Mitesh and felt that they were too young to get married, Jessica convinced him otherwise. They eventually got married in July 2009. The wedding was held in the beautiful garden of the bride's home. Initially, the newlyweds, Mitesh and Jessica, seemed like a perfect couple. However, things took a turn for the worse soon after. Mitesh's behavior changed dramatically, became distant and cold, leaving Jessica feeling lonely. Their intimate life also suffered, and they didn't have any physical relationship for about 10 months after their wedding. This was very distressing for Jessica, who couldn't understand why Mitesh's feelings towards her had changed so drastically. Jessica tried to find fault in herself, wondering if she was the reason for Mitesh's change in. Meanwhile, she had just graduated from university in 2010 and was looking forward to starting her career as a pharmacist. She has a good education and a promising career. However, Mitesh's attitude continued to deteriorate. He became increasingly controlling and suspicious, constantly monitoring Jessica's every move. In February, her family suffered another grief. Her grandfather falls ill. His health begins to decline rapidly, and death seems inevitable. Manal's husband does not allow Jessica to spend much time with her family. This was the root of the conflict between they. When Manal confronted her husband about this, he became angry and responded by punching her in the face. As a result, when her grandfather was seriously ill, Jessica was only able to visit him a few times. Jessica comes from a traditional Indian family where his word is the law, restricting her from making her own choices. She felt trapped in a lonely marriage. One day, she confided in her family about her concerns. She expressed her suspicion that her husband, Mitesh, was being unfaithful. She noticed that whenever he received a phone call, he would excuse himself to another room. Additionally, he often stayed up late, spending hours alone, which further fueled her doubts. In 2012, Jessica's suspicions about her husband's infidelity were confirmed when she discovered romantic messages on his phone. Seeking help, she confided in Mitesh's cousin, with whom she had a good relationship. Instead of offering help or advice, the cousin blamed Jessica for her husband's behavior, implying that she was responsible for his infidelity. This response from Mitesh's cousin left Jessica feeling isolated and unsupported. To make matters worse, Mitesh also prohibited her from seeking comfort from her own sisters. It became clear that Mitesh was hiding something and trying to maintain his reputation and authority within the family and local community. In 2014, Mitesh and Jessica relocated to Lynor, a suburb of Middlesbrough in North Yorkshire, in an effort to start anew and distance themselves from their family. They purchased a large house, made renovations, and later opened their own pharmacy. Jessica had hoped that this fresh start would bring positive changes to their relationship. While their relationship did improve slightly, one thing was still missing: children. For 6 years, Jessica struggled with infertility, and Mitesh made veiled threats that he would leave her if she didn't become pregnant. In October 2015, she decided to go through in vitro fertilization. However, the initial attempts were unsuccessful, causing her to become increasingly anxious and depressed, especially with the added stress of hormone treatments. To make matters worse, Mitesh's behavior changed. He became distant and cold towards her at home. He would only show affection in public, and even then, it seemed superficial. He was often preoccupied with his phone, and the tension between them became unbearable. She reached her breaking point and suggested they separate, confessing that she was unhappy in the marriage. Mitesh's response caught her off guard. He claimed to love her and promised that things would improve over time. He even suggested that having a baby would strengthen their family bond. Jessica believed his words. For a moment she felt comforted and listened to, and her doubts subsided. On May 9, 2018, Mitesh and Jessica Patel received the exciting news that 3 of their embryos had been successfully fertilized, with a transfer scheduled for the following month. Jessica was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a mother and eagerly shared the news with her family. Tragically, their happiness was short-lived. A few days later, on the evening of May 14, 2018, Mitesh Patel made a frantic call to the emergency services, reporting that he had found his wife's body at their home. He claimed that he had left the house earlier to buy food and pick up his laptop from work. When he returned home, He found that the house had been burglarized and Jessica was lying unconscious on the living room floor. Mitesh told police that Jessica's skin was cold to the touch and there were bruises on her neck. He was clearly distressed, crying as he spoke. Police assured him that rescuers were on the way. When the officers arrived, they found Jessica's body on the living room floor, her wrists and ankles bound with duct tape. A grocery bag was nearby. Despite the medical team's efforts, Jessica died on the scene. The investigators sought to determine the motive behind the heinous crime. Upon examination, they found that the house had been thoroughly ransacked, with drawers and closets turned upside down. It was evident that the perpetrators had been searching for valuables, as they had even torn apart their bed mattress. The missing jewelry and cash further supported the notion that the primary motive was robbery. Jessica's husband, Matej, also believed that their house had been targeted by robbers. According to Matej's statement, on the day of the incident, he followed his usual routine, working a morning shift, going to the gym and returning home afterward. His wife came home around 7 p.m. Later, Mitesh decided to order pizza and left the house at 7:44 p.m. Surveillance footage from a nearby pizzeria corroborated his alibi. Before leaving the pizzeria, he tried to call his wife to tell her he was on his way home, but no one picked up. Mitesh stopped at a pharmacy without notice, so he returned home later than expected. When Mitesh returned home at 8:50 p.m., he was met with a gruesome scene. His wife was bound, and their belongings were scattered everywhere. Neighbors was left reeling after the tragic event. This neighborhood is known as a wealthy and peaceful place and has never had a crime before. The autopsy report revealed that Jessica's cause of death was strangulation, with the attacker using a bagged, bare hands and an electrical cord to ensure her demise. Since there were no signs of forced entry, investigators initially suspected that Jessica knew her attacker and had let them into the house. Jessica's family quickly arrived and comforted Matej, who appeared to be extremely sad and lost over the passing of his wife. However, the police had their suspicions, and a thorough search of the house uncovered some crucial clues that would eventually lead to the capture and trial of the perpetrator. A health monitoring app on Jessica's phone also played an important role in finding the truth. 3 days after Jessica's murder, the lead investigator contacted her father, who was still near the crime scene, and asked him and other relatives to return home so as not to interfere with the ongoing investigation. The investigator promised to provide more information later. Meanwhile, detectives were preparing to arrest the prime suspect in the case, Mitesh Patel. Several key pieces of evidence had led them to this conclusion. During the search of the crime scene, police found a damaged hard drive from a surveillance camera installed in front of the front door. The device was discovered in a suitcase under the bed. Further investigation uncovered a hidden photograph in their nightstand that showed Mitesh embracing another man named Amit. Additionally, footage from a camera across the street revealed that only Mitesh and Jessica entered and exited their home on the day of the murder, May 14th. The footage shows that Mitesh returned home at 3:30 p.m. Jessica arrived home from work at 7 p.m. and Mitesh left the house briefly to pick up pizza at 7:44 p.m., returning at 8:50 p.m. Since no one else was seen entering or leaving the house, the evidence pointed to one conclusion. Mitesh was the likely perpetrator. Mitesh was the prime suspect in the investigation, but the police lacked concrete evidence against him. As the detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a shocking secret that Mitesh had carefully kept hidden. Jessica had suspected that her husband was being unfaithful and her instincts were correct. However, it was not what she expected. Mitesh was hiding his true sexual orientation. His marriage to Jessica was just a cover, a way to hide his true feelings for other men. 2 years into their marriage, Mitesh met Amit, an Indian man who was openly gay. Despite their cultural differences, they men quickly fell in love and secretly met each other whenever Mitesh was away on business. Unbeknownst to Jessica, her husband was leading a double life, pretending to be the perfect spouse while carrying on an illicit affair. In 2016, moved to Australia, but Amit and Mitesh continued their relationship. Mitesh had a plan to become same-sex parents with Amit by using Jessica's embryos and finding a surrogate. Mitesh had informed Amit that Jessica was having in vitro fertilization, IVF, and had asked if they could be together after this plan, to which Amit had replied that it would depend on the results. Mitesh confided in Amit, stating that eventually there would be no more obstacles in their relationship. In a message, Mitesh chillingly wrote, "Jessica's days are numbered." It was later discovered that Mitesh was secretly taking fertility-affecting medication to avoid intimate relations with Jessica. The investigation revealed that Mitesh's internet search history was reconstructed. He had searched for how to get rid of his wife, Hindu funeral, and procedure for obtaining insurance payments for the murder of a spouse. Notably, Jessica had a £2 million life insurance policy. After her death, Matej planned to claim the money and use it to buy a property in Australia. In the weeks leading up to Jessica's death, Matej had been actively searching for a new home, aiming to create a comfortable environment for his future family. Investigators analyzed their cell phones and found incriminating messages. They also discovered a fitness app that tracked the number of steps taken by Jessica's. The data showed that Jessica's phone had not moved since 8:04 p.m. However, 15 minutes later, the phone recorded 14 steps, suggesting that either Jessica had made her last movements or someone had moved the device. In contrast, Mitej's phone data revealed high physical activity and an elevated heart rate in the period leading up to his wife's murder, which was unusual for him. Between 7:44 p.m. and 8:30 p.m., Jessica's husband, Mitej, walked up and down the stairs multiple times, creating false evidence of a burglary by throwing objects around the house. Before calling 911, he went upstairs to conceal evidence, including a hard drive from a surveillance camera in the safe of the pharmacy he and his wife owned. During the police investigation, they found stolen jewelry, £25,000, and a couple of gold bars, which Mitej claimed had been taken during the robbery. They also discovered a roll of duct tape similar to the one used to bind the victim's arms and legs. The torn end of the tape matched the piece taken as evidence from Jessica's body. To create an alibi, Mitej had to go to his workplace the evening after the pizza party. Despite planning for years, he was remarkably careless and left a trail of evidence behind. Furthermore, DNA analysis found under Jessica's fingernails showed that it matched Mitej's DNA. Mitej had scratched marks on his neck, which he attributed to a fall. During the investigation and subsequent trial, Mitej, the accused, denied any wrongdoing. He claimed that his interactions with Jessica were mere coincidence. The 3-week trial strung together the developments in the case. It was established that he attacked his wife as soon as she entered the house. She fought back and scratched the attacker but was eventually controlled. Initially, Mitej had planned to kill his wife by administering the lethal dose of insulin. However, this method takes a long time to be effective and there is a risk that the plan will be discovered. Ensure a quicker outcome, Mitej suffocated his wife by putting a bag over her head. To make sure his wife was dead, he strangled her with his hands and then used a rope. The prosecution presented physical evidence, including empty ampoules found in Mitej Patel's laptop bag, which linked him to the crime. Mitej brutally murdered his wife, Jessica, in their home, a place they had shared for years. The entire ordeal took only 20 minutes. He then brutally tied her up to create the appearance that she had been robbed. Following the murder, Matej went about his day as usual, even stopping at a pizza place and calling Jessica's phone. The news of her death left both families in shock and disbelief. Tragically, Jessica had been seeking help in the months leading up to her murder, but her cries for aid were ignored. Only her sister seemed worried, but they couldn't do much to help either. The jury deliberated for 2 hours before delivering a guilty verdict. On December 5, 2018, the court sentenced Mitej Patel to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Mitej showed no remorse for his actions, and it seemed that the only person he felt sorry for was himself. The family was still grappling with the loss of Jessica's death, remembering her in their daily prayers and cherishing the happy moments they had shared together. It is unlikely that they will ever forgive Mitej for his heinous crime. According to Hindu beliefs, her soul must be reborn, since she suffered a lot in life and was unhappy but remained a good person. In the next incarnation, she will be rewarded. At least that was a comfort to her loved ones. The case of Brianna Zunino. A lot of people are concerned that an autopsy is scheduled today to identify a woman's body that was found in Reno, Nevada, on Friday. There is a possibility that it could be the missing college student Brianna Dennison. The body was found in a field on the edge of the campus of the University of Nevada, which is less than 10 miles from the house where Dennison was last seen in the winter of 2008. Brianna Zunino Dennison, a vibrant 19-year-old college student with a bright future, vanished without a trace, sending shockwaves through the community and igniting a relentless search for answers. As news of Brianna's disappearance spread, an army of volunteers, law enforcement agencies, and concerned citizens came together, determined to bring her home safely. Brianna's family and friends, gripped by fear and uncertainty, clung to hope while sharing stories of her infectious laughter, unwavering spirit, and love for life. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months as the search intensified. The quest for answers led investigators down a dark and twisted path, uncovering a heinous series of crimes. Law enforcement tirelessly pursued leads, meticulously piecing together the puzzle surrounding Brianna's disappearance. Their dedication and determination remained unwavering in their pursuit of justice. This is the story of Brianna Zunino Dennison, a young woman whose life was tragically cut short, but whose memory continues to inspire. Brianna Zunino Dennison was born on March 29, 1988, to Jeff Dennison and Bridget Dennison. Her mother lovingly called her Breezy because she reminded her of a refreshing breeze on a cool summer day. When Brianna was 6 years old, her father passed away, which was a difficult time for the family as the loss of a loved one always is. However, she persevered through the pain with the support of her loved ones. She spent her childhood in Reno, Nevada, and her mother's native town of Mendocino, California. Brianna's passion for traveling and world cultures took her to Hawaii, New York, Mexico, Jamaica, Japan, Italy, Egypt, Hungary, Austria, and France. She studied abroad in Rome, Italy, for a year with her family. Her ability to connect with people from all walks of life became part of her radiant personality. Brianna was raised in a tradition that valued children as the most precious possessions. Her relatives and close friends instilled in her the importance of being a loving, spiritual, respectful, and trusting human being. She had a deep affection for children and animals, particularly her dog, Ozzy. Brianna graduated from Reno High School in 2006 and was a sophomore at Santa Barbara City College, where she was majoring in child psychology. On January 20, 2008, Brianna returned home to Reno from sunny Santa Barbara during the winter break to visit some friends and family. She and her friends had attended events organized by Summer Winter Action Tours, LLC, a travel agency that catered to students. They also attended the Martin Luther King Jr. Gala weekend in Reno, which Brianna had reportedly attended in the past. On that specific day, she was last observed alive at approximately 4 a.m. Pacific time at her friend's house near the University of Nevada campus on McKay Court in Reno. She had gone there to sleep after attending a party at the Sands Regency on North Arlington Avenue. When her friend woke up the next morning around 9 a.m., Brianna was nowhere to be found. A small blood stain was noticed on the pillow where Brianna had slept that night, and her cell phone, purse, and shoes were all left at the house, which prompted her friend to alert Brianna's parents and local authorities. When investigators arrived, they assessed the crime scene. In the following days, detectives conducted a forensic investigation of the McKay Court residence where Brianna was staying when she was abducted. They found DNA on a doorknob that belonged to an unidentified male. The investigators were able to confirm that the blood on the pillow belonged to Brianna and began focusing on a kidnapping scenario. The detectives began searching the University of Nevada, Reno area for Brianna, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, joined the search efforts. The DNA found on the doorknob the night Brianna disappeared was linked to at least 2 sexually motivated attacks in the same area in the previous months, one on November 13th and the second on December 16th, 2007. On January 29, 2008, a woman from Reno claimed that she knew another victim who had revealed that she was raped at gunpoint in a garage on the University of Nevada, Reno campus in October 2007. However, the victim had not reported the crime. The investigators released a description of the potential suspected perpetrator based on this information, which was considered a positive lead. Identifiers used by women who had been sexually assaulted by the suspect were used to track down the perpetrator. The detectives began interviewing nearly 100 registered sex offenders who live within a mile of the McKay Court home, but none seemed to be responsible for Brianna's disappearance. Around 1,700 people, including Nevada's then First Lady, Dawn Gibbons, wife of then Governor Jim Gibbons, volunteered to participate in a physical search of a 100-square-mile area to find Brianna, who went missing, but to no avail. On February 15, 2008, a man named Albert Jimenez in Reno was just returning from his lunch break at a Subway restaurant. As he was walking by the road, he noticed bright orange-colored fabrics standing out among a pile of discarded tree limbs lying in a ditch near a Reno business park. When he approached closer, he discovered neon orange socks, which were attached to feet, which at first he thought was a mannequin, but later turned out to be a woman. Jimenez had heard about Brianna Dennison's kidnapping, but didn't think the victim resembled the photographs he had seen on billboards. Jimenez did not have a mobile phone, so he promptly returned to his workplace, EE Technologies, to call the Reno police. When the police arrived at the South Reno lot, Jimenez was informed that the victim was Brianna Dennison. As an autopsy report had confirmed that the body found in a field near a Reno business park was hers, Brianna had been assaulted and killed. A piece of underwear was also found near Brianna's body, along with DNA evidence from the perpetrator and an unknown female. The police believed that the underwear did not belong to Brianna and might have been left there too to taunt the investigators. The police then asked anyone who recognized the underwear as theirs to come forward, as they might have information about the perpetrator's identity, but no one came forward. On January 29, 2008, the Reno police released a description of the unknown perpetrator. The person in question was also linked to at least 2 sexual assaults in November and December 2007, and a woman claimed to have been raped in a parking lot in October. Previous victims had provided enough detailed information for the police to sketch a suspect. An item of underwear was found near Dennison's body, along with the killer's DNA and the DNA of an unidentified woman. The police stated that the item of clothing did not belong to Dennison and may have been left near her body to taunt the investigators. The police are asking anyone who recognizes the item of clothing as theirs to come forward, as they may know the identity of the perpetrator. On Tuesday, November 25, 2008, 27-year-old James Michael Bella from Sparks, Nevada, was arrested and taken into custody at the Washoe County Jail. He was charged with murder, first-degree kidnapping, and sexual assault. Bella was apprehended while he was dropping off his son at the Stepping Stones Children's Center in Reno. Bella had already provided the police with a DNA sample collected from a doorknob in Brianna's friend's house. The detectives also discovered that Bella was a former Marine and had been previously arrested in 2001 for threatening his former girlfriend's neighbor with a knife. On Wednesday, November 26, 2008, during a press conference held by the Reno Police Department, it was confirmed that the DNA collected from Bella matched the DNA found at the crime scene, positively linking him to the murder of Brianna Dennison and a previous sexual assault. It was also revealed that a friend of his girlfriend had turned in Bella via the secret witness program on November 1, 2008. After Bella's girlfriend had confided to this friend that she had found underwear unknown to her in Bella's truck as they were coming back from Washington State, where Bella had taken a job in March 2008. News media reports of Brianna's case, including a police sketch of the suspect and a description of a vehicle used in another rape, the month before Brianna's abduction, began circulating. Bella was questioned by detectives about his atrocity after the secret witness tip came in, but he denied his involvement and declined to provide a DNA sample. Bella's girlfriend was also questioned and gave police permission to obtain DNA from her 4-year-old son, whom Bella had fathered. The test confirmed that his direct relative, Bella in this case, had left a DNA sample collected at the home where Brianna Dennison was abducted and at the other rape that had taken place the prior month. On his way to Washington, it was also revealed that Bella had sold his truck in Idaho, which matched the description of the vehicle used in the previous sexual assault. At the press conference, officials mentioned that the vehicle was being returned to Reno to be searched and used as evidence in the case against him. On Thursday, May 27, 2010, Bella was found guilty of the murder of Brianna Dennison, and after deliberating for about 9 hours, the jury returned a guilty verdict for all counts against Bella, which included kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder. The defense attorneys argued against the death penalty, stating that Bella suffered an abusive childhood due to an alcoholic father, that he had been a productive member of society before his crimes, and that he was a model prisoner. However, the jurors did not accept these mitigating factors and handed out the death sentence. On July 30, 2010, Bella was sentenced to 4 additional life sentences for multiple counts of rape and kidnapping associated with attacks on 2 victims before Brianna's abduction and murder. Over the years, Bella's appeals have been denied. The story of Brianna Zunino Dennison is one of resilience, heartbreak, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. Brianna's family, who faced unimaginable pain and uncertainty, stood strong in their fight for justice. Their unwavering determination became a beacon of hope for others facing similar tragedies. The legacy of Brianna's story reaches far beyond her case. It has sparked crucial conversations, inspired community initiatives, and brought awareness to the issues of violence and safety. Law enforcement's tireless efforts ultimately led to the apprehension and conviction of the individual responsible for Brianna's abduction and murder. Their dedication and unwavering commitment to finding justice showcase the power of teamwork and determination. As we remember Brianna, we hold on to the memories of her vibrant spirit, her love for life, and the impact she had on those who knew her. Her story serves as a reminder of the importance of community, compassion, and standing up against violence. In the end, Brianna Zunino Dennison's legacy will live on not only through the love of her family and friends, but through the collective efforts to create a safer world for others.